we have Nina O'Hare, a community archaeologist from Worcestershire Archaeology and Archive Service. Nina is a community archaeologist and led the Roots in Time project. This won the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Archaeology and Sustainability Award at the 2023 Archaeological Achievement Awards. So I'm already really excited to hear what Nina has to say, and I hope you all are as well. Nina, when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. Right, I'll get my talk up. So hopefully everyone can see my slides now. Give me a shout if not. Thank you very much, firstly, Jeanette, for the welcome, but also to everyone else who's joined tonight. As Jeanette just said, I work for Worcestershire Archive and Archaeology Service. We're part of the local county council, but I'm here tonight to talk about our project called Roots in Time. What I'm going to talk about tonight is a little bit about tree planting and how this project came about. And I'm then going to explain what we did during the project and the archaeology that was found before finishing with a few thoughts for the future. So if you have any questions along the way, please do pop them in the chat. They'll all be collected for the end, and I'll answer them as best I can then. So I wanted to start here. This is a site that's becoming increasingly common, and we're going to see more of it in coming years. So this is newly planted trees and then little protective casings. This is the starter, the impetus for this project. So I'm not here really to talk about the merits of tree planting versus other forms of climate action, but tree planting is something that is happening across the UK and across other countries around the world. It's generally positive where it happens, and it's going to have quite a noticeable impact on our landscapes. Tree roots can do significant damage to buried archaeology though, as archaeology, particularly in rural areas, tends to be within sort of 30 to 50 centimetres of the kind of current ground surface. Tree roots can go a lot deeper than that, and they do have quite an impact. However, it's kind of not all doom and gloom, because actually where archaeology is present, that's quite a valuable opportunity, not just to learn about the past, but also to connect people and to find new meaning and new connection to that place. So our Roots in Time project is really an example of what can be done, and hopefully it will inspire other people elsewhere to find some similar opportunities, perhaps take some inspiration and do something similar, something slightly different from it. And if you joined tonight really just to see some nice archaeology, don't worry, there is some coming up, I promise. Thought I'd better start by explaining where this project took place. So it's near the town of Evesham, which is sort of on the south side of the West Midlands. So as you can see in the map on the left, it's not too far. We're in the county of Worcestershire. We're a little bit southeast of Worcester. And the site itself, for anyone more local who knows the area, is just north of the town of Evesham. It's by the village of Norton. And as you can hopefully notice on the map on the left, it's alongside a river, which is quite key to this site. The site itself is now a public nature reserve. It's called New Farm Nature Reserve, and it is open to the public. So if anyone is in the area and interested, it is now something you can go and visit. So the County Council in Worcestershire committed to planting 150,000 trees over the next few years on council-owned land. New Farm was a council-owned small holding, and it was decided that it would be a tree planting site, and it was due to be one of their flagship sites, as well as becoming a new public green space. This is part of the site before this project started. So as you can see, it's really quite a beautiful part of the countryside. This is a little part of the site looking out sort of beyond the site, across the river to kind of hills beyond. It's actually quite hard to see the River Avon when you're on the site. As you can see, the land slopes quite a lot. So although we're near the river, this land mostly isn't liable to flooding. It's higher up than that. So the river's kind of hidden sort of in between some of those lines of trees. Tree planting is slightly different to other types of projects that happen because it doesn't go through the planning process in the same way that houses or new schools or roads and quarries do. That means that the normal route when archaeology maybe there gets picked up doesn't happen with tree planting sites. However, our county archaeologist in Worcestershire was consulted about these plans, and based on what we know from the surrounding area and the fact that we're really near the River Avon, which is quite a hot spot in this part of Worcestershire for prehistoric and Roman settlement, there's quite a high chance that there is some archaeology on this site. Kind of really in summary, this is kind of a sum up of all the archaeology on the site. There is a sort of red line boundary, sort of an outline of the small holding. The site is going to become a nature reserve, tree planting site. It's a little bit faint though, but it runs up against the river, and it's a big block of fields that sort of go around that bend in the River Avon. As you can see, there's a really large sort of pinky red area on the right hand side, which has been labelled as schedule monument and immediate setting. So one of the fields within this site is already protected and has some known archaeology within it. It's a site that was picked up by aerial photographs quite a long time ago, and in those aerial photographs there are crop marks that have been seen, so where the crops have grown less well or perhaps more well because of things going on under the ground. It was thought to be a prehistoric settlement, but nothing else was really known about it. It hadn't been investigated before, but there's clearly something going on in that area. Because of the potential for there being archaeology on the site, we've already got the scheduled monument, we know there's quite a lot along the River Avon. The council undertook a geophysical survey across the whole site to see what was going on. And actually, what it revealed was quite a lot more archaeology than we were expecting. That whole purple area on the left-hand side contains quite a lot of what's probably Romano-British, Iron Age, Roman farmsteads. So big enclosures, fields, trackways around that. That's certainly what it looks like. And there's at least sort of 3 distinct areas sort of going across the slope that goes down to the river. So in some ways a little bit of a surprise. We expected some archaeology on this site, but not loads. So to give you just a bit of a glimpse of one area of the site, this is just one little cluster. All those lines in red are probable archaeological features. If you start playing sort of dot the dot with a lot of them, you can kind of make out some square enclosures, possibly some sort of long linear sort of trackways coming off at the side. There's a big purple rectangle near the bottom. That's a more recent glass house from the area of market gardening history. So there's layers of history on this site. There's a lot of brown lines going across it you might be wondering about as well. Those are probably medieval and slightly later ploughing. There's latterly been agricultural land. There's clearly loads going on before that point. So there was a bit of head scratching going on at this point because the original plan for this site was to really densely plant it with trees. Not only was that not going to be great news for the archaeology, actually it's also from a landscape and a wildlife perspective not the best thing really for this area, and actually a really mixed habitat with mix of woodland and wildflower meadow and more scattered areas of trees actually offers a much more diverse range of habitats and it is much better for the biodiversity and wildlife in the area. This was kind of pushed a little bit by the fact that from an archaeological perspective, couldn't put quite as many trees on the site as the council originally wanted. But what was able to happen was that the really dense areas of archaeology were planned around, and those are going to be the wildflower meadow areas, and the kind of less dense areas where areas we're not expecting as much archaeology have been left as being sort of more dense woodland. So the plan you can see on there is one of the sort of revised final plans. The really blocky green areas are kind of woodland tree planting. There's then some scattered areas on the edge. And you can see, hopefully, up by the farmhouse, sort of on the left, towards the top left corner, actually there's a whole big area that's going to be left. That's because there was a lot of archaeology turning up there, and that was going to be left as wildflower meadow. So that was kind of good news in one perspective, that we've got archaeology being left for the future, and we've got quite a good outcome as well from a wildlife and landscape point of view. But we wanted to know a bit more about what was going on this site. Geophysical surveys are great at giving you an idea what's going on, but they don't give you the full answer. And the other thing is that there was still some areas that were going to have trees planted on them where the roots were going to affect some archaeology. So we got some funding together from the National Lottery, Heritage Fund and Arts Council England to run a community project called Roots in Time. So on the screen you can see a lot of our lovely participants who took part in the first part of the project. So the aim of Roots in Time was really to get local communities involved in both exploring the archaeology on the site, but also sharing it, because this was going to become a public woodland and green space, and we wanted local people to be involved in shaping that and feeling a connection with it, as well as letting visitors to the site in future know about what's under their feet. We started the project with an excavation in summer 2022, so 2 years ago now, and that was before the tree planting. So the tree planting wasn't due to occur till that winter. And where we aimed to excavate primarily was on the areas of archaeology that were going to have tree planting on them. So those are really the areas that are sort of the edge of these probable farmsteads, these big enclosures that we can see. We had 14 days to run the excavation, and across that we had 75 people who came and took part. And we worked really closely with the youth centre in Evesham as well, so they came and took part too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we actually found on the site. So we excavated in 2 different areas. Our main area up on the left-hand side was up by the farmhouse, so that's up near these big enclosures that we could see. And then on the right, we had 2 trenches by the scheduled monument. So scheduled monuments, you need permission from Historic England in order to investigate in those areas, so they're protected in law. We considered whether we wanted to investigate inside the scheduled monument itself, but actually some of the crop marks strayed slightly outside of that area, so we chose to focus on looking at those. So I'm going to talk first about this area up on the right-hand side. So here you can see in red the results of the geophysical survey. There's lots going on, and you can start to see perhaps enclosures, perhaps field systems, little bits of trackways. There's lots and lots there. And there was no concrete idea of date for this, other than it looks probably prehistoric, but prehistoric is quite a long time. And so we put 2 trenches in to find out a bit more what was going on in this area. So you can see there on the left, that's an aerial photograph of our 2 trenches. And on the right, that's the comparison with where they were in terms of that the geophysical survey, the kind of bigger picture of what was going on. The main thing to say is that that bottom trench, trench 4, at the very bottom, we had what looks like a really wide ditch. Actually, a ditch that had been open probably for a while, and it had been recut a couple of times as it sort of filled up and kind of gone shallow, and then they'd redug it again. One of those recuts of the ditch contained Middle Iron Age pottery. So that dates from between about 400 and 100 BCE. So better part of sort of 2,500 years ago. That seems to be part of a sort of circular or sort of slightly square, between square and circular enclosure. Give you an idea of size, that's about 20 meters across. So it's the sort of size that you could fit one roundhouse in, but you're not going to fit a whole village in. That's not to say we didn't find any signs of a roundhouse in our trench, but there's clearly people living fairly near to this area. We had bits of animal bone, kind of all the kitchen waste that had been thrown away, and it's certainly starting to look like this is Iron Age in date. Quite excitingly, we also had this big concentration of pottery that came out, which you can see one of our participants, Naomi, very carefully excavating. It did kind of want to fall apart on us, so she did a very good job. And there's a picture of part of this on the left-hand side. So this might not look too spectacular, but it's really quite exciting to find because it dates from the early Iron Age. This is the rim, so the very top of quite a large storage jar. It's been fired at a fairly low temperature, so it's done quite well to survive. Possibly see bits of decoration on it by someone squidging their fingers in when they've been making it. And early Iron Age pottery comes from between about 800 and 400 BCE, and this is quite rare to find in Worcestershire. We find quite a lot of middle and late Iron Age sites, but we don't find much early Iron Age. So not only is that quite exciting, but it's also starting to tell us that actually this is perhaps a settlement that's in use for quite a long time. It's perhaps in use during the early Iron Age, or there's something going on in the area in the early Iron Age, and it stays in use for perhaps several hundred years. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what this site might have looked like, there are two pictures on the screen which are reconstructions from excavations elsewhere in Worcestershire. So not this site specifically, but give you a bit of an idea of what we think might be going on in this area, which is possibly that we've got an early Iron Age settlement where there's roundhouses, and later on they become a little bit more enclosed, which is something we see kind of in the area happening throughout the Iron Age, that people start, whether it's defending, whether it's for status, or for whatever reason, they're starting to build sort of more defined boundaries around their settlements. So that's probably what's going on here. But this is really kind of a first peek at what's going on in this settlement. But really exciting to know that actually this is looking Iron Age, and we've got occupation from that time on this site. So I want to have a look now at our other areas, the area on the left. So we've confirmed that we've, on the right, got some settlement that's probably from around 2,500 years ago. We want to know what else is going on the site. So we've got these really big areas of possibly these big square enclosures and things like that. So there's two fields shown really on that map. The one on the left-hand side is where we've got these big enclosures. That was being left as wildflower meadow. So it'll be there if people want to investigate it in the future, but it wasn't the focus of our excavation, because what we had a look at was on the right, so where we're starting to get towards the edges of whatever is going on. There was going to be tree planting in this area, and we really wanted to know what archaeology was going to be damaged by the trees and have a better understanding of it before that happened. So the first trench I want to talk about is Trench 1, which we opened up a really big area around this quite interesting shape. It's sort of like a C shape. There's a sort of a bit of a screenshot of it up in the top corner. This looked quite different to everything else in that area. So everything else in this area was quite regular. It was quite straight lines, quite square, and that's fairly typical of Roman sites. So in prehistory, you tend to get more curving sort of enclosures and things like that. Later on, you start getting kind of a bit more regular things. So we're intrigued by what was going on in this area. And what we found out is that we had some really interesting geology and a really big series of patches of gravel, but no archaeology. And this was initially really quite disappointing. We thought we were going to spend a lot of our dig up in this area. But I think what it really pointed out is that there is a reason why we excavate. Geophysical surveys are great for giving us an idea of what might be below the ground, but they don't give us all the answers, and they are an interpretation of what's there. And sometimes untangling what's geology and what's archaeology is really, really hard to do. So we're moving down slightly to trench 3, so kind of the bottom of this field. And this is where we did get lots and lots of Roman archaeology, as we were expecting we might somewhere on the site. So you can see the photograph at the top. Hopefully you can see the dark stripe sort of just to the right in the middle of that photograph. That's the fill of quite a big ditch. There's some people troweling in there, so hopefully you get an idea of the size. And that ditch is clearly really near to where people were living. It was filled with quite a bit of charcoal and a lot of finds. And some of them were even kind of clustered. You could almost imagine someone tipping a basket or a load of stuff all in together and it just been dumped there, and then it's pretty much stayed there ever since. So that was really useful as well as exciting to find. And just to show you some of these, to go around kind of from the top left round, we had a bit of Roman roof tile. The lovely thing about this is you can hopefully just see from the photograph, but the maker has wiped their fingers across it in sort of a rainbow sort of semicircle pattern. It's always lovely to see, to sort of be able to touch where someone's fingers have been in the past. The next one going across, so sort of going clockwise, we've got the base of a Samian pot. That's Roman, it's come all the way from France. Then got a piece of Roman window glass in the corner, which I'll come back to. That one's a little bit of an intriguing one. And at the bottom, we've got this locally made tankard. It's a mini version of what we normally find. It essentially looks like a mug. Technically, it's a tankard and it's a mini one. But that was really lovely, and it was almost whole. There was a lot of excitement when we came out because we thought it was going to be whole, but people don't usually throw away usable things, and it does have a chunk out the back missing. So what all these finds were really telling us is that we're on the edge of this Roman settlement. Finds give us quite a good idea of date. So it was in use throughout quite a lot of the Roman period, probably up to about 300 CE or AD, depending what time you're using. The main heyday for the site was between about 120 and 200. So kind of the very middle of the Roman occupation of Britain. We've got bits of roof tile, so we know there's a fairly substantial tiled building somewhere on the site. It's looking like quite an affluent farmstead, but probably is a farmstead. And in some ways, it's quite typical of what we see in South Worcestershire, but it has a few quirky things about it, which have been particularly interesting to see. So one of those first things is that we've got a lot of pottery from elsewhere. So it's not uncommon to find pottery. In fact, you usually do find pottery in the Roman period that has travelled quite a way. So that Samian ware pot I mentioned earlier, those nice shiny orangey red ones, those you find fairly commonly on Roman sites. They're imported from France, but they like your fancy tableware of the time. So a lot of households would have wanted to own a bit of it, even though it was probably quite expensive. So in some ways it's not unexpected to find things from far away, but we've got quite a high proportion. We've got a lot of a type of pottery called black burnished ware that comes from Dorset. We find it on a bit of it on most sites in Worcestershire of this date, but we've got a lot more than we normally get. And we've got little bits of amphora, so those really big storage vessels, they sometimes have a pointy base, that come from France and Spain. And those are the things that get imported for olive oil and wine and things like that that are coming over to this country. So they clearly have quite good trade links here, and actually we're probably not too far from a Roman road. The line of it's not known exactly, but we know that just south of Evesham, we know where the road was running, and we know that the town of Ulster also had a Roman road, and probably the most sensible route between those two places goes quite near to this site. So it might be that they're being able to take advantage of these good trade connections with a road nearby. We've got a load of drinking vessels as well. So that little mini tankard, that mug, that very kind of cute sized one. Not just that, but we've got a lot of other things that you could drink out of. Now, you expect some of those on any site, and that tankard is quite particular to the Worcestershire and sort of Severn Valley area, so we do get quite a lot of drinking vessels. We've got even more than we normally find. And actually, we're wondering again if that Roman road perhaps is the reason why. This probably was a farm, and it's what it was mainly doing. But like farms today, they're probably wanting to diversify a little bit, and it might be that they were selling food and drink to passers-by along the road. Travellers have always needed refreshments. Doesn't matter whether that's today, stopping at a motorway service station, or in Roman times. And actually, perhaps is an enterprising farm that has seen an opportunity to make a little bit of extra money. Quite just an intriguing possibility. We then got a couple of sort of individual finds that tell a little bit of a different story. So one is a metalworking chisel, which I'll show you in a minute, and the other is that little bit of window glass. So you might be thinking that you haven't heard about Roman window glass before. I wouldn't be surprised. It's pretty rare that it turns up. It's very, very high status. And there's only 3 excavations in Worcestershire that have ever produced Roman window glass that we're aware of. This is something quite unusual to find, but also quite unexpected for what is essentially a farm. So it's probably a farm doing quite well for itself, but it's still a farm. Quite how that bit of window glass came to be on this site is quite a mystery. We've had lots of suggestions. Glass was quite well recycled during the Roman period, so whether it was collected once it was broken and someone was recycling glass, that's a possibility. Intriguingly though, one of the other excavations that has produced a bit of Roman glass window is from a site just over the river, and you can practically see it from this site. So whether there's a little bit of an element of trying to keep up with your neighbours and there's somehow sort of second-hand glass windows going on in the area, whether it was a broken bit and someone, perhaps a child, someone else kept it as a curiosity, don't know, but it's one of those objects that I really, really wish if it could talk to us, I'm sure it'd have something quite interesting to say. So this is the metalworking chisel I talked about. Might not look too much. It's gone rusty, which is why the shape's a bit harder to see. It's a bit lumpy, but it's quite a particular shape. And this is usually used for cutting hot metal. So not the sort of thing you necessarily expect to turn up unless someone is working metal on the site. So again, it just perhaps is intriguing possibility that this is a farm, but perhaps dabbling in quite a few other things, as well as the sort of growing crops, keeping animals. So I want to show you a few more finds, not to talk about the site as a whole, but although they do tell us lots about it and they're fascinating stories, but these artifacts in their own right have their own stories to tell. So 2 photographs on the right hand side, they're the same pot. It's quite a little cup. It's Samian-ware, so that kind of quite fancy stuff that's coming from France. And the great thing about Samian-ware is it's stamped with the name of the maker on the inside of the base, so the sort of inside in the middle. It's quite unusual to get, well, not quite unusual. You often get just the first part of the name, or you get a bit of the pot that doesn't have the base in the middle. So in the first place, it's quite nice to get the whole name, but this is a particularly interesting one. If you can just about make it out, the letters on this is P-O-T-T-A-C-B, and then there should be, but it's a bit too faint, it's not being stamped in properly, there should be an S on the end. So this is a workshop of the name Potticus. So I promise this is not an April Fool's joke. There was a Roman pottery workshop and probably a potter called Potticus. There's only one workshop with this name. It was in the centre of Gaul, as it was at the time, centre of France, near Lisieux, and it ran for about 30 years, between about 170 and 200 AD. So we know quite a lot about where this came from, but it's just quite spectacular to get sort of a named individual that's connected to a particular object that we can hold today. That's quite a special thing. The object on the left-hand side is a similar design. So again, it's the base, so the round base of a vessel of some sort. The rest of the side's been chipped off, so we don't know quite how big the actual container was. But as you can see, it's got that circle in the middle, and it's got something stamped, a line stamped across. So this is an imitation of that Samian ware. If you look closely, it's not writing, it's just a row of triangles alternating sort of up and down. This is a bit of a one-off, and we think this is something that was made in Britain and probably by a potter who was illiterate. Samian ware was the kind of the fancy thing to have, and people wanted it. And there was perhaps some enterprising potter who's thought, I can make some stuff like that, or perhaps if I imitate that style, I can get more for my wares, and people wanting to buy it. And the customers perhaps themselves can't read and write, and aren't really bothered. They've got something that looks a lot like the real thing. And I think this is just a really lovely thing, not only to connect with that individual in the past who's making this, but also realise we have so much in common. This is essentially a Roman knockoff, that cheap sort of rip-off version, because you either don't want to or can't pay for the real thing. And that's something that still happens today. And it's sometimes surprising to see that actually that was happening 2,000 years ago. And really, we're not that different, even though there might be millennia that separate us. So we've had some really interesting finds on this site that have their own stories to tell. And I'm a firm believer in the power of stories and their ability to connect us to the past and to help us find empathy and understanding with each other today as well. In archaeology, we find a lot of stuff. So we find buildings, we find objects, we find ditches, things like that. And it's all too easy to forget about the people, the living, breathing people in the past who also got grumpy. They had family and friends too. Perhaps they had a favourite food or chores they didn't really like doing. Just like us today. We can get glimpses of these individuals, and actually they are all around when we start looking. They're in things like that little mini tankard, that little mug. When you look at it, it's a bit wonky. And actually, we think that's something that went a bit wrong. And the potter tried to save it, and it was perhaps sold as a second. Now, maybe that's someone having an off day. Maybe that's an apprentice and someone learning. We don't know their name, but we can start to see a little bit, and sort of touch their lives in some way and realize that actually we do have quite a lot in common, and we tend to have more in common than not with people. We obviously need to be really clear about what is fact and what we don't know, but it can be easy to lose sight of, I think, what's exciting and interesting about the past when we kind of remove the people from it. So what we wanted to do in part of this project, we had a creative strand and wanted to be able to take some of these starting points, some of these objects, and to let our imaginations run a bit with them. So we don't know, these objects can't talk to us, but if they could, what might they tell us? So we worked with poets, Jean Atkin, and some local groups, and based on being able to handle some of these objects and some of the questions we perhaps asked about them, some of the things we thought, various people wrote bits of creative writing around that. I just want to play a few clips of that because I think it can demonstrate it much better than I can just by trying to explain. So hopefully this audio will work. There's a couple of seconds pause and then the talking should start. This is a poem that was written by Marie Baumier, and it's read by a member of Evesham Youth Centre. And then there's a following poem that's read by Jean Atkin. So hopefully this will work, and someone give me a shout if it doesn't.
The skull. We had to bury the skull and move on. Rains had failed, crops had failed, the families languished, shrunken, weak. The maidens sat silent. Disease visited us. The rain had been welcomed with quiet joy. At last, now all would be well. The river filled, we drank clear draughts, drunk with hope and sweet survival. Our youngest visited the river, borne along by relief. They threw branches as offerings into the waters, watched as they were washed away. They ran back up to home, excited, exuberant. The youngest, he did not return. Then we knew we were not wanted here. The skull had to be buried, returned. Chalky, dried, treasured, we returned it to earth and moved on, seeking a new home. By M.J. Bomya.
Samian. Holding this reminds me of making pots myself. This one's off-center. It's so hard to get them centered. It's a hard skill to learn. You put your thumbs in the middle and draw the clay out. They didn't get it quite right. So human, this imperfection. You can feel the process. In my hands are all the things the Romans brought here. This Samian, an expression of skill, sophistication, literacy. I feel closer to France by holding it.
So that first piece was inspired by a cow skull that was buried quite intentionally at the end of a ditch. So the map at the top of the screen shows our trench 3. Hopefully you can just make out some sort of black lines that show ditches in that trench. And there's a narrow curving ditch that comes around, and at the end, which is circled in red, was where the cow skull was found. It was placed on top of a couple of bits of Roman pot. It was very intentional, but why it was put there is really hard to get at. Oh, apologies. That practice is something of kind of intentionally burying animal bones is something we see particularly in the Iron Age in Britain. But this was clearly Roman. And it was interesting that perhaps this is a settlement, this is a community that have lived in this area for a long time and possibly moved slightly around this landscape. And although the Roman army have arrived, lots of new cultures and ideas and stuff have come, but perhaps there's some sort of cultural practices and things, beliefs that they're perhaps holding on to. So that was the inspiration for that one. So I think sometimes it's worth us letting our imaginations run a little bit, and sometimes trying to get back to that humanity of what was really going on. So the creative writing has been made into short audio clips that link to the information panels on site. So if you're a visitor to the site, you can find out about the archaeology in a variety of different formats. So there's all the sort of factual information, but you can also explore it in a slightly more sort of imaginative way as well. So you'll notice the information panels are quite visual. So we intentionally wanted them to be much more image than text heavy. And we worked with Evesham Youth Centre to create those panels. So they did most of the artwork that went on them. And we really wanted to let the local youth centre feel some pride and ownership in this area. This is a new woodland and a new public space that's being created on their doorstep. It's for them to use as much as it is for visitors to the area. And we wanted them to be able to shape a bit what was going on the site. So they've been involved in, as well as the excavation, in the information panels and the audio trail. And they've also made a geocache series that we're putting out on Thursday. So that will be out soon as well. Something else that Roots in Time created is a public sculpture on the site. So you can see some photographs of it there. The brief for this artwork was that we wanted it to sit quite lightly on the landscape. So it had to be fairly climate conscious in its choice of materials. And what we wanted it to do was to celebrate our shared connection with others who had historically used this landscape, and to help people connect today with that landscape as well. So it was created by Sarah Edwards of Spare Room Arts, working with local groups. So we wanted to involve groups locally who may not otherwise have a chance to get involved. So we worked with a dementia group in Evesham and a day centre for adults with learning disabilities, and they made all the mosaics and clay impressions that have gone inside what's ended up being a really beautiful little wooden sculpture that you can sit inside. So it's got a practical purpose as well as being something beautiful, and it's framed to look at the view. So this has achieved quite a lot of things in one, and I really want to share this photograph because it's starting to take on a life of its own, really, which has been really amazing to see. So this photograph was taken at the summer solstice sunrise this year, so about a month or so ago. This was an event that we planned. There's a site called the Valley adjacent to the nature reserve. The Valley is a shopping centre, and has got a sort of country part. They've got other sort of family activities there. And they were really, really keen because they connected the site to use it. And the sanctum, as it's been called, that little wooden sculpture, has really sparked people's imaginations. And they were really keen. They felt that it was a really special point, and in an amazing landscape as well, to see that sunrise. And so they took it upon themselves to arrange an event that was all based around that sculpture. We've had a visitors book in there as well, and it shows us that it's really become a focal point for the site. Partly it's a covered seating area where people can sit on their walk. They can perhaps shelter if there's some rain and things passing, but people have started to record the wildlife that they spot when they sit there. A lot of people have talked about the peace and quiet and the tranquility that they find, and it seems to be inspiring people as well. We've had little bits of poetry, we've had a bit of drawing going on in the visitors book as well, and people keep coming back to this. So it's really wonderful to see that actually this is something that's been created by this project and by local communities, but it's starting to take on a life of its own, and kind of create its own identity and help people connect in different ways to this site. So to sum up, the project has uncovered both prehistoric and Roman archaeology. We've got settlements, so that right-hand area is Iron Age activity, at least. We've got Roman settlement, definitely in that one area we excavated, but there's at least 3 clusters, so it's possibly a settlement that's moving across this landscape over time. Interestingly, Norton Village, which is just off the left-hand side of the map, it's thought to have Saxon origins. It's definitely a medieval village. So this might well be one sort of extended community that has, over millennia, moved gradually across this landscape. We've been able to involve people locally in both the excavation and the sharing of the heritage on this site. And the New Farm Nature Reserve has been heavily shaped by all of this. So both from the planting design right at the beginning through to being able to enhance what is actually on the site. So if you go and visit it today, all the things that have been created and add to that site are there for both visitors and locals alike, and local people have had a very heavy hand in shaping that. So this is just one tree planting site. It is on the larger side of tree planting sites, but hopefully it offers inspiration for what can be done. There's going to be a lot more tree planting sites in the future, and it will be interesting when those come up to see that actually a lot of those will be in places where there's archaeology. And I think something that might be interesting to think about in other places and in future is actually involving the people who take part in investigating heritage with the tree planting itself. So quite directly joining that climate action with investigating ancient landscapes. So whether you're a local resident, or you're a professional archaeologist, when tree planting comes up near you, do have a think, do ask about what opportunities there are to get involved with local communities to explore that landscape and how it's changed over time, but also shape it going forward. So thank you very much for listening. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll stop sharing my screen in a minute. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll be able to answer those.
Thank you so much, Nina, for this presentation. It's actually been quite a treat to hear more in depth about the archaeological finds from the site, and I love the way you framed it around the humanity of time of us, of all of us, right? And how we can connect with the past, but with each other. I mean, just listening to your talk, I'm from Spain, and just having that connection of the amphora being from France and from Spain, you know, it just makes everything closer. It removes the distance. And we've gotten quite a few questions, and I'm excited to get through them. But tying in what with the bit of the conclusion of your talk about how future tree planting sites may come up against not the same challenges as you have. Are there any plans to have your project serve as a best practice, or would you how might you frame that so that others might look to your successes as an example?
Yeah, so I think so. Hopefully, it will be useful to other people in future because there'll be a lot of opportunities coming up as more tree planting schemes and sites happen. I think we're only just finishing up this project. It's like the last few bits are going on at the moment. So I think probably this is the start of actually reflecting back on actually this is hopefully is a model that other people can use elsewhere and take bits that work for them, add bits that are different. So certainly I think this is probably the start of that. I'm very grateful to the CBA for, I guess, opportunities to share that. But yeah, if anyone's got any thoughts or places to do that, then they're always welcome. Yeah.
And another really good question from Jan Scott. I will read the question. How much conflict is there between the needs of a nature reserve, so leaving aside the tree planting, and the archaeological project? Did you have to change your methods at all to keep the nature reserve needs happy?
Yes, that's a good question. So I suppose this is a little bit different. This became a nature reserve during the project. So it's a little bit different to starting out in somewhere that already isn't designated as a nature reserve. Our main constraint really was not so much on the archaeology and how we excavated it, but in how we've been able to advertise it to visitors. So because it's a nature reserve, because they've got ground nesting birds, there's hares that breed on the site, and they're very keen that although they want visitors, dogs need to be kept on leads. And actually, if they have hordes and hordes of visitors all at once, that's not a good thing for the site. So it's probably affected more how we've been able to advertise it and some of the events we've run to raise awareness, because from a nature reserve side, their priority is to the wildlife in some ways, and they don't want 500 people turning up on one day every day for it. So that's probably been the main consideration for us, but I think probably is different in different areas. If you're in an area that's already nature reserve and has got certain wildlife, I think actually the only other thing, badger sets were the only other thing some of our trenches we had to, this is I guess any archaeological project, you can't excavate too near to badger sets, and if your archaeology is too near, then that's just kind of bad luck. So I think they were our main sort of considerations.
Was it easy to get the local community on board with the archaeological project?
Yeah, so we built this project with local groups. So when we knew this opportunity was there, I went out and talked to some groups locally who we thought may want to be involved, but may not be able to get involved in general public events. So things like the Dementia Group and Freedom Day Centre we needed to be able to go to them. It didn't really work if they had to come out to us. So it was working with them to find out what events were going to work best. So a little bit like sort of really any community archaeology project, it's always good to try and take people along with you, rather than sort of foist something on them that they may or may not want. It's going and saying, we've got this opportunity, what do you think of it? Do you want to be involved? And if so, we can work on it together to be something that we all want.
And was there a sense of collective community pride that the project had been given recognition for just its kind of forward-thinking approach to archaeology and our connections to nature?
Yeah, so I think certainly we were very surprised to win both 2 Archaeology Achievement Awards. That was really wonderful. I guess we felt like we were doing something interesting, but we didn't feel like to have the recognition that was that special has been really lovely. And I think particularly we've worked a lot with the youth centre in Evesham, and we've had a group that have taken part throughout, and that kind of long time of being able to get them involved in lots of different aspects, they're starting to see that actually this is something lots of people want to come and see, and starting to change that perception of no one's interested in what we do to actually realizing they've created something special that people are going to see for a long time. And yeah, we're starting to see the pride in that, which was one of our big aims really for working with the youth centre, is to be involved locally and have pride in the area and pride in what they do.
And one of the things that really stood out to us about the project is that transformative power of a project like this can address so many things about the needs of a community, right? In which we understand the environment, we understand our connection to the past, that sort of place making and place building through a project. I love hearing about the sorts of things you've been finding in the visitors book as well. Just visitors taking it upon themselves to write lovely notes, not just I was here, but this is what I observed, which I think is magical. It has created this space in which people are able to connect on their own terms as well. And that is outstanding, right? That is a huge achievement, and it's wonderful. I have another question, and it's more on the archaeological side. Why do you think the archaeological record does not stretch beyond the year 300?
Okay, so we, on the Roman part of the site, we had stuff up to about 300. That's quite typical in Worcestershire, that we have Roman sites that are in use for the first few centuries for the Roman occupation, and then they kind of dwindle and people are moving elsewhere. On this site in particular, we were only able to excavate by one area, and we know that from geophysical survey results there are these several areas of occupation. So it might be that they're moving just to another part of the site. It'd be really interesting to know if those enclosures are all in use at the same time, or if they're sort of in successive use. I suspect that people are probably moving and that they're all slightly different dates, but we don't know without excavating that. So my best answer really is that it's not that uncommon at that date for people to move. Quite why that's happening, I think it's probably got lots of broader answers. The Roman Empire was starting to struggle a little bit. Towns are also growing, and they've perhaps got attraction there. So I think there's lots of things probably going on, both locally and on quite a broader level, as to why settlements start shifting around that sort of the later part of the Roman era. Yeah, hopefully that answers. There's a lot more reading you can go and do if you're interested.
I'm going to ask you one more question before we go on to sort of wrapping up the session, unless anyone has any more burning questions they can put in the Q&A. But I think your presentation has really sparked an interest for our listeners. And I do have a question that is about, are you familiar with any other similar projects going around in the UK? We've been asked specifically Norfolk, but are you aware that there's anything similar that people might be able to participate in?
I don't, I'm afraid. But there are lots of community archaeology projects happening all over the place. So particularly if you're in Norfolk, I would get in touch with your local historic environment record. They're a really good place to contact because they tend to know what archaeological work is happening in the area. If you've not heard of them before, you can Google historic environment record. And I would probably have a start there if you're interested locally. But yeah, I'm sure there probably are other schemes going on, but yeah, I'm afraid I don't know of any off the top of my head.
That's okay, Nina. You have provided so much value for all of us in this session. I am going to wrap up for tonight. Nina, I want to thank you so much from all of us for the session. It was incredible. I'm sure we all want to hear more about it. But before we all head off, there's going to be a quick on-screen poll that you should be finding soon. If you could please participate in it. It should be very brief, and I'm not sure if anyone is seeing it on their screen. There it is. If you could please let us know. And also, there will also be a Festival of Archaeology evaluation survey in the chat. If you've enjoyed this lecture and would like to make a donation to the CBA, there will also be a link in the chat. I'm going to give people a second to catch up with all of that and make sure we've got our links in the chat. Yes, there's feedback. And I just want to thank everyone for coming to the This is Archaeology lectures. There will also be a link to attend further ones. And I will just check in. Thank you again for everyone who's joined us, and thank you, Nina. I'm really grateful to have taken this deep dive into your project. And thank you everyone for coming, and I hope to see you all again soon.